Welcome to another episode of the IdeaCast. Today we have a leadership topic. Everybody knows this when you have to make the numbers and when you are under pressure in a deadline situation, for example. The question always is how to choose winning projects. And today's topic is about two parts. So, in the first part, I will make some general remarks, and in the second part, I will talk more about leading under uncertainty. So, what do you do when you have to deliver a project, you have to deliver results, but there's so much uncertainty and ambiguity in the situation? So what I'd like to cover today are some key principles. Along the way, I will introduce some tools and concepts that you might use in your own day-to-day work life. And at the end, I will walk you again through a simple example case study that brings it all together. The situation that we often find is that we have, let's say, a starting point. We call this the baseline performance, and we have a target that we have to meet. It could be a long-term target where we want to grow an organization or a business, a whole market from one point to another. And the question is always, what are the key projects that we should choose? So how do we fill the gap with key projects? Oftentimes, it's not only about one project, but a whole set of projects. And there are so many alternatives to choose from. So this brings us to the whole idea here that we have, let's say, a whole group, a potential portfolio of projects that we could choose from. So these are different options that we could activate over time. And the question there always is, which one of these projects is delivering against the targets and has the best return and the least risk? Now, let's step back for a second and reconsider, what do we mean by winning projects? Well, first of all, you need to make sure that you can actually do the project. So can it be completed within a given constraint, for example, within the time frame, the deadlines, the budget constraints, the resources, people, etc. And also, does it deliver the expected scope in terms of functionality, the quality, but also the customer experience? Because you don't want to deliver a project and, as some people say, to throw the project over the fence, and then the quality at the end is inferior. So that's not a good idea, of course. Secondly, it's about the return. So does it deliver the numbers? Does it deliver the expected outcome? For example, in terms of profit, of customer acquisition, customer growth, but also in terms of competitiveness. Again, the last thing that you want is to work on a project for month after month, or maybe quarters or years, and then find out that it is already obsolete when the project hits the market. We talked about that in different settings. It's a fairly dynamic challenge. And I would encourage you to also take a look at some of the other videos about project dynamics and so on. And last but not least, it's also about risk. So what are the so-called side effects? And I like to think that there are no side effects, there are only effects. And what are these effects and the risk factors? For example, the win and loss of a project often and the related opportunity cost. For example, you've been working on a fairly important project, you put a lot of effort in it, and at the end of the day, the client chooses another alternative. So you could have done something different in that time and with that money, with the resources. But also the risk of potential quality issues and the reputation impact that comes along with it. So that's a key consideration. And again, a cross-reference here to the topic about recall dynamics, which is a new topic I'm looking into right now. So that's another thing that I would encourage you to take a look at, also from a let's say, leadership perspective. And last but not least, projects can also have penalties. So if you're delivering too late and you have penalties in your contracts, you need to figure out how to minimize these penalties, as well as the damages and the litigation cost potentially. Now, this is something that we have to consider really from start to finish. So selecting a project is not really the end game. You have to be prepared to put in some effort at the beginning to evaluate the project, but also to monitor the project and to stay with the project even after it has been delivered. So that's why we call this the winning project. It's not only the project that wins you some business, but also keeps you in business in the long run. Now, in terms of feasibility, if you go back to a video which I provided a couple of weeks ago, actually, about project dynamics, let me recap that because I think it's really important in this context. So let's say you're starting with a certain design, and you have a list of criteria and requirements that need to be met. So then you have a certain time frame in mind, or the customer has a certain time frame in mind. And also you have usually a budget constraint in terms of people that you can work with, money and other resources. And that really determines what your target corridor should be. So as long as you are staying within this green field, within this green area, everything is pretty much okay. But as soon as you're running over schedule, you're running into trouble. And as soon as you are running over your budget, exceeding the budget, you're in trouble as well. Now, worst case, both things happen sooner or later, and then the project is really in high distress. And we see this again and again, especially with larger, more complex projects, but also, let's say, smaller projects like development projects, campaigns, facility moves, building a new location, etc. So that it's really worthwhile taking a look at these dangerous dynamics. Now the question is, when you're choosing to let's say take a different path, take a different project, this could actually lead you into the area of distress. So it's really worthwhile thinking ahead which one of these projects has the best potential, has the optimal risk and return profile, and can be done in the same time frame, so that you're not wasting your time, you're on the wrong track, you have to backpedal, and that usually costs a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of frustration, and it can be really, really dangerous for a business. Now, let's keep in mind, project selection is very hard to reverse, and therefore it is a key strategic decision. The project life cycle. The projects really don't, let's say, pop up. There's usually a process involved in this. It usually starts with an ideation phase where you have a number of, let's say, ideas or tests or experiments that you have run, and maybe even some pilot projects where you have, let's say, allocated resources and you ask somebody, okay, go ahead, go do it, figure out what it takes to do that, run a small scale test, usually a low impact test, which doesn't take a lot of time and resources. And then when people come back from experimentation, then you have to choose between these projects. And usually there's usually more than one project to choose from. And that brings you into your portfolio phase. So you're picking the projects that are really the winning projects, and you carry them forwards. And then you have to steer the projects, of course. So it's also about selection, because here it's more about diagnosing the progress and figuring out, are these projects going in the right direction, or are we taking on more and more risk, or are the projects performing more and more predictable, so that we know what the outcome will be. We know we're meeting the deadlines, we're making the money, we're making the numbers. And then you want to, of course, allocate resources to the projects that are winning. That is also a form of project choice, project selection. And keeping that in mind, this is all about, let's say, a longer process. It's not just a one-time event. Now, there's so many tools that you can use for project selections, and I will just give you a short list here. And all of these tools have their, let's say, different specialities, and you can use them in different contexts. So, for example, the business case is a great tool if you want to ask really for an important project and people should come forward with their ideas. And how to write a business case is usually not easy, but good news is there are also some resources available that you can take a look at. Now, project pitches, pilot projects, I think these are also tools that you can use, but also more, let's say, quantitative tools like net present value, internal rate of return calculations, the decision matrix, which I'm going to just mention in a next slide here, but also sensitivity analysis of a business case. And that brings us closer to an assessment of the risk and return profile. And I will walk you through a short case study that will illustrate how that works and what you can read from this kind of analysis. And of course, dynamic risk analysis, I covered that in several other topics when we talk about more dynamic simulations of projects and campaigns, for example. Now, these are all tools to help you narrow down the many different possibilities to really the vital few options that you have. Those options that have the highest potential, the highest performance, and carry the least amount of risk, of course. Now, as promised, very classical tool is the decision matrix. Now, the reason why I'd like to show this tool, it's fairly easy to use, and it's a great tool for facilitating a dialogue in a project team or a management team, for example. Very easy to facilitate. I think you can do this on a whiteboard. You don't need much for that. Doesn't take a lot of time, and it's engaging the team in a discussion. And during the discussion, the team is making the assumptions transparent and the criteria transparent. And that really makes this a great tool because you can explain to somebody else who wasn't in the room, for example, why you chose a certain project over another. So you choose that project that best meets the most important criteria. Now here in our little example, obviously it's project C because it maps best to the most important criteria. And I will put a template and a little bit of an instruction like a guidebook together in the briefing center so you can take a look at this and use it and download it and adapt it to your own needs. Now, in part 2, I would like to talk about a case study, example case study, and this is about selection of projects under uncertainty. So that takes it a step forward now. What we usually find is that we have different strategic options. So a very common situation, and I'm just picking this for the sake of the illustration and the discussion here, Project A could be, for example, a custom solution. And Project B could be a standardized solution which is being sold in high volumes. The question is always, which route should you take? And that's a very common problem in different companies, in software companies, in service companies who, for example, when you have figured out a great business model, a great product that enjoys product market fit, then the question is always, okay, where should we take this? Should we go more down the custom integrator and the high quality custom development path or the high volume path? Now, these are really the characteristics of the choices. Project A might be a custom solution, very service-oriented, with larger customers, so large enterprise or organizational customers, which require more integration. And it might have, therefore, less R&D work upfront because there's more custom development necessary. Project B, on the other hand, might be volume oriented, and you might want to sell that to medium-sized customers who do not require so many specific integrations or customizations. So in other words, it's more standardized, less integration, but on the other hand, you need to invest more in R&D and less in custom development. More R&D cost at the beginning means that you're pouring more money into this. But that doesn't mean that, let's say, volume products require more R&D. Actually, there are usually some hidden costs, and that really is the question also here in this case. So I put together this short case. I'm not going through all these numbers, but important to note here that you have two projects, project A and B, and then we have, let's say, revenue elements, cost elements, and profit. So this is typically what you might get in when somebody's presenting a business case to you, and they're suggesting, okay, we're pushing for project A because it gives us about 10 million in revenue. We estimate the cost should be about 3.3 million. And it should be a fairly attractive project to do in terms of development, for example, and go to market, because it produces a very decent profitability and profit margin contribution. Project B, on the other hand, has other characteristics. So we might spend a little bit more on R&D, but we have more customers to play with. Now, when we talk about uncertainty, we need to understand, of course, what is the impact now on the key parameters. So, for example, we're interested here in customer growth. So these are the bold numbers here: customer growth, revenue, cost impact, but more importantly, the bottom line, the margin, because you can take route A or B and you might arrive at the same contribution. So it doesn't really matter which project you have if they are both on par. And these projects are pretty close together. So one is delivering 7.1, the other one 8.6 million, despite that they have very different revenue and cost profiles here. Now, taking it a step further, what we are looking at when we talk about uncertainty is we think about possible outcomes. For example, let's take the R&D cost here, for example. For project A, we estimated, so this column here, the mode, indicates this is the most likely value. And keep that in mind from the previous chart. So we estimated 300K, but it could be as low as 250K, probably not much lower, but could be significantly larger, because if customers, the large enterprise customers, the purchasing department has more requirements that you have to meet, then the development cost could go up quite significantly. Now, what we do here is we specify for each one of these parameters the most likely value, the minimum and maximum value. And then we have our input parameters here. So, for example, market size, our assumptions about market size, conversion ratio. These are all input parameters, and the yellow ones are calculated output parameters. Okay. So when we do a sensitivity analysis, what we do is we run a large number of simulations, and we're testing different combinations of possible values of these parameters within the given ranges. But we are also using the underlying statistical distribution for each parameter. So it might look something like this in the case of R&D that we just discussed. On the horizontal axis, the x-axis, we have the R&D cost, and on the vertical 2-axis here, we have the probability. So either it's the density probability or cumulative probability. So what does it mean now for our example? In terms of R&D costs for project A? Well, we said we have a minimum cost of 250K. So that's the absolute bare minimum that we have to invest in this project. But yeah, we think it's more likely to be around 300K. So there you see that's the most likely value. So there's the highest probability on our probability distribution curve here. And it's fairly unlikely that the cost will be less than 300K. So the area under this curve from the highest point to the minimum is fairly low compared to the other side, because it can be as high as 800K, for example. So there you see that the likelihood, simply by the area of this rectangle here, it's much larger. It's much more likely to exceed 300K, and that's an important consideration. Now, when we do a simulation, what we are doing is we take a random sample, giving the underlying assumptions and distributions, and it could look something like this. So here we ran, I believe, 1,000 simulation runs, and what we find here is that there's a 78% chance that the R&D cost will be higher than 300K. So that's quite a significant number, of course. But the chance that the R&D cost will be between 300 to 500K is still also 68%. So there's a fairly high probability that we will exceed our budget. Now, and then we do this parameter by parameter, and we do it for both of the projects. And keep in mind the distribution that I just showed. So this is, let's say, a distribution based on the expert judgment. But it can also come from analyzing reports, from industry reports or controlled experiments, for example. In any case, it is important to make the assumption transparent and also make the uncertainty about these assumptions transparent. And then you can work with it. So what we are doing now is to take a look at the outcome, the impact on the expected performance. So when we are running the simulations, let's say 1,000 times, what is the impact on revenue, for example? And here the picture shows that project B, for example, generates higher revenue and has more revenue upside opportunity. So the median value for project B is actually fairly high. It has a wider spread, but it has more upside. So it means that there's some cases here, it has more chances that the project could exceed actually the median value of here roughly around 25 million. On the other hand, project A is a little bit more contained, seems to be a little bit more predictable. But interesting is also that the minimum value here of project B, for example, is pretty close to the medium of project A. That's an important consideration. So can't really, a lot of things cannot go wrong here with this project. Now, when we take a look at profitability, the picture is actually a little bit different because project A can achieve higher levels of profitability, but the spread, the variation is much larger. On the other hand, project B gives us a decent profitability, and it seems to be more predictable, indicated by the tighter distribution. So here we think it's a little bit more than 40% of profitability, and project A could give us, what is that, maybe 65% of profitability, gross profit maybe. So that's quite a difference. But the question is, how much risk are you willing to take? And with project A, you have a lot more downside risk for the profitability. So it's an important consideration. Next question is to ask, which factors are driving profitability performance? And we do this, we get this from our simulation here. And here it shows that project A, the performance is determined pretty much by the deal size. So we call this the tornado chart. Looks a little bit like a tornado. And the deal size can be influence the average profitability a lot. So what it actually means and how to read this is, in a worst case scenario, the deal size, if they are really low, at the end of the day, then the profitability could be dragged down to as low as 19%. But it could also be on the other side, 77% on this side here. And the second most important factor is the integration cost. So that's how to read these charts. And this is important information because now you can ask, okay, what can we do about it? How can we run the project and prepare the project in a way that we take the risk out of the equation? So let's take a look at project B, for example, different tornado chart. Also, deal size is an important factor, but here you have also the integration point. And since we're talking here about a high volume project or product, can we think, for example, about a partner strategy, an ecosystem strategy, where we give more of the integration work to the ecosystem? And in terms of customer acquisition costs, so CAC here stands for customer acquisition cost, we see that this is also a fairly significant factor. And here we need to ask, Can we run more controlled experiments before we go to market, for example, by doing controlled small-scale advertisement experiments to figure out what for example, the KPIs are in terms of click-through rates, conversion rates, etc. What can we do about conversion optimization, the digital marketing mix, and also it really requires us to take a look at the sales process. So how can we introduce more velocity in the sales process and take the cost out there? So in conclusion, the first thing to remember is to spend enough time on a project and business case evaluation before selecting a project. Secondly, consider feasibility, risk, and return, not only the revenue potential, but really have a balanced view about what the project profile is going to look like. Number three, conduct sensitivity analysis before and during the project. It's also important to repeat the analysis once you have new data and new insights coming in. You can update your previous a priori assumptions, for example. And number four, steer the project with milestone reviews and then go for stepwise allocation. So that means that you're not spoon feeding the project, but you make the project go forward dependent on the performance. So the allocation should always follow the performance and the potential of the project and not any other criteria. Now, the question is, which one of these tactics are you going to apply? And in our little case study example between project A and B, which project would you choose? If you would be the leader and you would review these projects. Now, this topic and more tools, templates and simulations you can find in the related briefing center as always. And if you liked this episode, please leave a rating or review and stay connected with us on these social media properties, and you can find us under these internet URLs. I'm looking forward to hearing from you, and I'm looking forward to see you at the next episode of the IdeaCast. Good luck.